I'm talking today about corporate positioning or strategic positioning, which is a term you will hear quite often if you talk to folks from the investor relations department, corporate communications department, public relations. It is somewhat overlapping with other ideas like mission and vision statement, but there are certain elements that are very unique to a corporate positioning exercise. So I want to spend the next 10 minutes talking about some of them and give you an idea what this topic is about. It affects basically any company out there. Is not restricted to life science at all. It's relevant for new companies that are still flying below everyone's radar screen and you want to make your first impression, but it also impacts companies that are more mature, where the positioning is evolving, certain business activities are maybe getting more important than others. So you see this kind of exercise, companies are doing this not every year, but certainly every second year to check whether their positioning is still in line with their strategy. I just want to spend 1 minute, not even 1 minute, on why I'm talking about this topic, just so you know who this person is. I studied biology, so I do have a science background, but then moved on to journalism working in the space. So I already saw these companies and wrote about their strategy and positioning. But the lion's share of my career, I spent more than 20 years now working either for one company in the communications and investor relations department. And my longest period for this was the company called MorphoSys, an antibody therapeutics company here in Germany, which over time has morphed from a pure technology company to a fully formed drug developer. So in these more than 10 years, I've seen how the corporate positioning and the messaging changed and needed to change over a certain period of time. I spent more than 8 years now on the agency side. So first working for a transatlantic organization called McDougall, advising all sorts of companies, big and small, across the landscape of biopharmaceutical drug developers, diagnostics companies, and med tech companies. And since 2 years, I'm running my own little shop. But to move into the more fun part, why should you, especially young companies, but as I said, also maturing companies, care about your corporate positioning and really think these things through? Here's a small graph, which you will probably often see popping up on LinkedIn every once in a while, that shows one segment of the life science industry. In this case, antibody drug conjugates, ADCs, very hot field at the moment. You've seen very many recent deals. So this is not let's say, it's a rather recent graphic, but I'm sure there are going to be even more names up popping in the future. Similar to many other fields, the same graph would apply to gene therapy, to radiopharmaceuticals, to AI and drug discovery. You won't really find a niche that is basically empty and whether you're only company operating in it. Most of the time, you're entering a more mature market with many players out there. And the right dot here at the lower right side, this is you. This is your new company, your new baby. You're super proud of it. You want to make an entry into this market in the right segment. You want to be understood. You want to gain everyone's attention. And of course, people haven't really waited for you to do that. All these logos that you see on such a screen represent companies, represent networks, represent investors that have put money onto the table to fund these companies. So lots of interests out there that some of them actually don't want to see you succeed. If you have a revolutionary product, you might be a threat to some of these more established players. Some might be collaborators that you want to work with. So understand that you're entering a complex network of ideas, of interests, of science, certainly. And whatever you want to bring to the table and to this market needs to be understood well, understood fairly quickly, because everyone is busy these days. And the way to do that is really to think through about your corporate messaging, about your corporate positioning, so that you send the right message into these networks and into these markets. A second mechanism, I would say, that people like me see very often is a bit unfortunate, but it's human nature, I guess. These days, you say thinking outside of the box, that's a good term. It sounds like you're being very creative. The reality, though, is that when investors or other people see a new company, they usually analyze it and understand it by comparing it with stuff they already know. They like to put you in a box. They see this thing and say, oh, okay, this is somewhat like the company that I know here. This is maybe an ADC company. The strategy is like this and so that's very similar to something else I've seen before. Everyone thinks you're unique, and that's, of course, very good. But still, understand that people will contrast you to the things they know. And most people, because they're busy and want to get stuff done, try to put you in one or the other box. And with that box comes certain labels. And with these boxes also come certain ideas about how valuable the box is, how valuable the box is that you're in. And this may relate sometimes to strategic or drug development aspects, like whether you have a really first-in-class product that is not comparable to anything out there, whether you're a fast follower to someone that is already on the market, but you are aiming for a certain market share, or whether you have the perfect solution, maybe a bit behind the others, but you think you're going to be best in class and over time dominate the entire market. So there are many of these aspects that are at play that make people put you in one or the other boxes, and some of them are more factual. Others are more related to certain trends. These days, if you are a small molecule drug developer looking for allosterics inhibitors, you might be in a very nice box. Molecular glues are all the rage. If you're a microbiome company, a couple of years ago, you would have been very hot and people would have welcomed you. Right now, microbiome is suffering a bit. And people are looking at the field and saying, okay, how long will it take till there's actually drugs really coming out of it? So be aware that it's natural for your audience to contrast you with something they know. And if they're harsh, they rather put you in one box pretty soon, pretty fast. What corporate positioning actually means is creating a communications platform, that shows in your website, that shows in your IR pitch deck, that even shows as guidance when you're talking to people, that helps you define and in some ways manipulate people to put you in the box that you want to. The most valuable box, hopefully, for your science to be put in. It creates a compelling narrative. So you also want to just not be one of the many people in that box. You want to give your audience an idea why you could come up as a winner in whatever box we're playing in. And you want to give people with your messaging an idea of how fast is the company going to make progress? What will the progress actually look like? What are the milestones you want to set yourself and communicate, reaching out to all kinds of ideas about credibility and track records. So you want to set some expectations where the company is going, at least in the foreseeable future. And you want to have an hook so that people actually buy into your vision and essentially say, if that's true, then I think you really might be a winner. And that's what corporate positioning should accomplish. There are all kinds of ways, different ways to skin the cat. And I don't want to go into all the details of how I do this with my clients. There are multiple agencies out there that do it in different ways. But here, just to run you through a couple of ideas, with the first one maybe being a bit provocative, but do you want an external person to help you with that, or do you want to do it internally? Maybe not the greatest sales pitch, but technically, you can do it internally. If you have someone that you can really dedicate, being a champion for this process, an internal communications person or whatever, then I think every once in a while you should take time with that person and define a process to consider, what is our messaging? Is it still the right one? Do we need to change it? Are we actually getting the results back we want or not? So you can do it internally, but of course the benefit of using an external person is, everyone lives in his own little bubble. Someone like me can step out of the bubble and give you maybe a more clearer picture. There are other aspects. The way I do is I usually do a survey with with all the people that are part of the leadership team and the board. So really talking to all of them individually, because sometimes there's 100% overlap, and sometimes, people have different ideas about the best way to communicate that. And that's really interesting to see and dive into. I take a long look at the peer group, which I've shown a couple of slides earlier. No company is working on an island. You're all part of a broader network and peer group. And it's good to define how you fit in and why you could be a revolutionary player in this field. When you're more mature, when you're a fresh company, you start from scratch, you still have no website, you still work on your pitch deck, you have a clean slate. More mature companies should sometimes look at, is there stuff we can preserve from our current messaging, things that we need to kill and drop and work from scratch. But looking at the stuff that you have is also very important to see what has worked in the past. Back in the days, I would have, guys like me would have done that in a full day workshop. In this more virtual environment, I usually do a half-day workshop with people to then bring everything on the table, discuss everything I have found, everything I've learned in this survey that I mentioned, and define with the team, the leadership team, that corporate positioning. And everything should be on the table. There should be nothing that is forbidden. If there's one thing that kills such a process, then it's politics. So the good, the bad, and the ugly, everything needs to be discussed. And if you involve an external person like me, I think you should have some clarity what the end goal of the process is, not just having a nice meeting, but sometimes that work goes straight into a website. Sometimes the work goes straight into a pitch deck. It's great to define that right at the beginning. And we have a saying that no one leaves the room before everyone is happy with the corporate positioning that we have achieved. To kind of wrap up my part, I don't want to steal everyone's time. Here's a nice analogy that I think works well for me. If you have ever done a design process with a proper agency like the Nanobot folks, for your website, for your brand, for your logo, you often get this nice little kind of small booklets at the end, your brand guide or style guide, where the folks that really know about that stuff, the designers, tell you, this is how you use your logo. This is how you should not use your logo. These are the fonts we use. These are the colors that define your brand. And I see corporate positioning a bit like that kind of stuff, like a style guide for your messaging, for your strategy. When someone approaches you and wants to talk about technology, you know exactly how you're going to play it. You know exactly what you're going to talk about and what you might actually not talk about yet because you don't want to, it's not in your interest, or something the lab is not ready yet for prime time. And likewise, when you talk about the team or stuff like the use of proceeds, so actually what you're going to do with the money an investor is giving you or should give you. And that's a good way to think about this. Be strict, just as you should be strict with your brand and your logo and your materials, is a good way to think about your messaging too. To wrap things up, here's a nice quote that I found where hits the mark quite nicely. It's from a US businessman, Lawrence Bossidy here, who had his prime time, so to speak, in the 90s. So it's a while ago. You can see it here in the time frame he used. So basically he says, if you can't talk to people about your strategy in 20 minutes, you haven't done a proper job in this positioning department. Everything is moving faster these days. Often you have 20 minutes for an entire presentation to a business partner or an investor. But by and large, what he said here is still very much true about corporate positioning and how it's really done. Thank you. Yeah, no, happy to address that. I mean, obviously there's always, there's not a golden recipe for everything. It depends a bit on what exactly is happening. If you have your financing round secured and you're a new company, you want to think about positioning, but you also want to have your new website in place and things like that. Usually I say, if you're approaching a big event, you should at least 3 months before that think about your positioning at the moment, whether you want to update it But if you need a great positioning to actually get investors excited, then I would even start 9 months before you need the money. So it depends a bit on where you are in your spectrum, but really kind of 3 months is hitting it very hard for everyone. I wouldn't go much lower than that.